You know, all of these stories are coming together in my head and around the idea of the war on Christmas, because a lot of people are talking about the war on Christmas. I'm not going to go on to the war on Christmas, but the story of the tax reform and the hysterical Democrat reaction to having slightly lower taxes for the middle class and good taxes for corporations to bring jobs back. I mean, it's kind of a typical Republican thing. It's what we expect. It's why we, vote for these guys, so they'll cut our taxes. And if you don't think they're hysterical, listen to Nancy Pelosi answer the question. Somebody says to her, it's just a tax cut, right? Listen to her answer.
Isn't really what's going on is that many people are getting a very modest tax cut, and some people are getting a tax increase, while a lot of this is also going to business, but it's not the end of the world?
No, it is the end of the world. This healthcare, the debate on healthcare is life, death. This is Armageddon. This is a very big deal. Because you know why? There's really a very hard way to come back from this. They take us further, more deeply into debt. What can you do but raise taxes? They contend that their gift to corporate America of $1.5 trillion, could be up to $1.5 trillion, will be paid for by the growth it creates. And even their own people say, nonsense, not true. Not true. So let's be truthful with the American people about that. They throw a few crumbs to the middle class, what they give with one hand, they take away in bounty with the other.
It's very tough to come back from this, because whoever heard of the government raising taxes? It's like once you cut taxes, they can never, ever raise taxes again. My favorite was this guy, Larry Summers, used to work for Obama. He wrote an op-ed saying that 10,000 people will die because of these tax cuts. Here's his cut.
Look, I think this bill's very dangerous. There's pretty clear evidence looking across different states and looking when health insurance has been phased in and out. When people lose health insurance, they're less likely to get preventive care, they're more likely to defer health care they need, and ultimately they're more likely to die. And it's very hard to quantify precisely. My piece explains why an estimate that thousands will die as a consequence of this bill is actually a very conservative estimate, done much, much more carefully based on much more rigorous evidence than the absurd claims made by some that this bill will somehow pay for itself.
This is not true, by the way. The National Institute of Health did a study, and they said there was absolutely no way to justify this. There's little evidence to suggest that extending insurance coverage to all adults would have a large effect on the number of deaths in the United States. The rate of death is still 100%. So I think it's not going to have any effect on that whatsoever. Hey, I just want to pause for a minute, because I forgot to say that Lauren Southern is going to be on the show. Excellent YouTube star, and we had a really good conversation. It's a pre-recorded interview, but it's a really good conversation about feminism and the alt-right. But, here's the thing. The question is, like, they basically feel that you can't live without the government. The government has to have all this money because you can't even breathe. You can't even go on breathing without the government. You need the government to just, pump your heart and all this. It's the life of Julia, remember? She needed from the minute she was born to the minute she died, she needed the government to do all this stuff. And all these people, I especially like Patton Oswalt, the comedian, who kind of went nuts over this and said it's the end of America. And then he sent out a threat. He said, I'm going to take the money that I get from my tax cut and I'm going to give it to liberal causes. And all the conservatives said, great, that's your choice. You don't need the government to give charity. And this question about giving charity, the first thing they do is they say, what would Jesus do this? Would Jesus cut taxes? And it's actually kind of an interesting question, because it is what we're talking about, is what the war on Christmas is all about. Is all of this is about basically who is in charge of giving charity and who is in charge of taking care of the poor. Because there is nowhere, you can go through every line of the gospel and you will not find a place where Jesus says, give other people's money to the poor. There's no place where he says, take people's money away and give it to the poor. It doesn't happen. But to give the liberal side their due, there are places where nations are judged for not being charitable. So we all agree that as a nation, we have to be charitable. What we don't agree is who gets to do it. And this is the question that constantly runs through everything, every aspect of Western civilization from the beginning. I mean, it basically is an invention of Christianity that's an extrapolation of Jewish thought. Because remember, the Jews when they first found God, when they were first found by God, they lived without government. It was just God was their government. And then one day they said, no, we want a king. We want to be as powerful as all the other nations. And they got a king, and God said, okay, well, God said, they're abandoning me for a king. And then he chose Saul, and he didn't work out, and he chose David, and that became their moment of empire. And so the Jews constantly thought, well, that was so great that now that our empire has fallen and we've gone into the Babylonian captivity, one day, David is going to come back, and a king is going to come back. And he did, but he was not the king that a lot of people were expecting. It was a different kind of king, an entirely unearthly king, who then started to say, who said, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and unto God what is God. And that conversation has defined the West. I mean, if you go back and read through the history of the Middle Ages, it is all arguments between popes and emperors and kings about who gets to choose the clergy, who crowns the king, who decides that the king is in fact blessed by God, who populates the church. Clergy, can Henry VIII get divorced? Does he have to get rid of the pope to get divorced? These are all the things that defined this struggle. And it's now, right now, the Supreme Court is listening to an exact, replica of this argument in this case about the Masterpiece Cake Shop, where a gay couple went into this cake shop in Colorado and they asked for a wedding cake, and the guy was a Christian. He said, look, he serves gay people all the time, but he couldn't bake a cake for a gay wedding because he believes a wedding is between a man and a woman. Silly him. I don't know where he got that idea, but somehow he got that crazy idea came into his head that marriage is between a man and a woman. He didn't want to participate in this, and the state is basically saying, no, you have to do this because everybody has to do it. So we're not singling you out. And what he is saying is, this is my art. He's even called Masterpiece Cakes. He says, this is my expression of myself, and you are basically violating the First Amendment. And he has an argument that as a Christian, he has refused to do cakes with dirty words on it and things like this. So he's saying this is the same thing. And so this is what we're arguing about.